Okay, we are live. We can start.
Thanks, Dipti. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to all of you, wherever you are based on this planet. And welcome everyone to the final panel of the day, Thinking Through Temporalities and Care in Habitation. I'm Rohit Muzumdar, and I teach at the School of Environment and Architecture. One of my current research interests, attends to the housing experiences, responses, and innovations to the monsoon's everyday wetness and its extreme events in coastal cities such as Mumbai. I'll be speaking on this panel from this experience. Before I introduce to you all the panelists here, I'd like to invite my colleague Sabha Giradkar to take 5 minutes, some time to present the context that have become the backdrop for questions that this panel has posed. Sabha's core research interest revolves around the adoption of sustainable practices in the built environment, and she's currently examining ideas of environment through notions of care in urban practices. So welcome, Sabha. I'll invite you to introduce the context that have shaped just a minute, I'll share my screen so that helps.
Yeah.
Can you see?
Yes, I can see.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll start. Okay. Thank you, Rohit, and welcome everyone. I'll present 5 contexts that are central to some of the inquiries that we have been engaging at sea and that have become a backdrop for the questions this panel poses. As green norms have proliferated in the building construction industry, in an effort to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions and help regulate the Earth's temperature, inquiries into the habitat that have emerged around questions of resource consumption. Next, sea has been engaged in spatial explorations to envision not only net zero, but also net positive built form in terms of energy efficiency. Such efforts also ought to consider the possibility of a Givon's paradox, that is, the increase in energy efficiency in built form could end up contributing to an increase in energy consumption in other areas of living. This poses a question: how could spatial explorations imagine new cultural narratives about resource consumption in the web of social relationships as against single buildings? A second discussion on sustainability is advanced through the notion of the vernacular, that is, reducing the extended footprint of resources by relying on local materials and technology, and thus inquiries into the habitat have emerged around questions of the local. However, ongoing urban transformations, such as those along extended corridors of urbanization, where the extended corridors of Coimbatore, where the notions of local are often deployed, present new contexts of an economy that is uncertain and in flux. These present new questions about the practices of anticipation in an uncertain economy, and the challenge is to envision spatialities that are nimble to adapt to the flux. Moving next, the narratives of toxins and pollutants that flow into the extended footprints of forests, rivers, oceans, and land, which support human life, but whose costs are largely borne by those involved in the labor of extracting resources and dumping waste, are a third way in which discussions on sustainability are structured. Inquiries into the habitat have therefore emerged around the questions of pollution and waste. However, the predominant responses to these questions either attempt to put a full stop to activities of extraction and dumping or through complex calculations of crediting and debiting carbon that only end up shifting the problem elsewhere or on someone else or something else the other. As urbanization finds its way along extended corridors, as is the case in the outskirts of Coimbatore, inquiries into the habitat have emerged around the relationships that human species ought to build with other species. Such questions are equally important to the transformations taking place within the cities. And as efforts towards mapping human animal conflict hotspots gain footing, responses to them oscillate towards drawing hard boundaries to preserve wildlife environments on the one hand and the lack of political will towards such preservation on the other. Meanwhile, some academics point out that although the instances of reporting on human animal conflicts has increased, we do not know whether their intensity has increased because there exists very little historical data of recorded conflicts. In either case, questions about interspecies relationships have become central to the discussions on urbanization. In a backdrop of gathering storm of changing weather, questions about how the rising seas will affect coastal cities have come to the fore, along with the discussions on the way in which such cities should be or could be waterproofed. The current conversation on the future of coastal cities such as Mumbai sketches extreme ends of a teleological future. The protagonists of this conversation have dwelled on invoking the rule of law for increasing infrastructural capacities to either drain or preserve the environmental features that hold monsoon's wetness, call for planning en masse resettlement to a higher topographic ground, and have even started to speculate tongue in cheek post apocalypse scenarios of a submerged city.
Thanks, Abha. Thanks for taking us to to these five contexts. So this is not an exhaustive list, but just setting a backdrop of some of the contexts that C's work has engaged with, the work in our school has engaged with. And in engaging with some of these contexts, we've arrived at these questions that become the basis for setting up this panel. I won't discuss the questions. They're there on the screen over here for you to read. But I want to just briefly wanted to point out was that we wanted to open out ways of thinking about the environment or the habitat as we call it through the tropes of temporalities and care. This is because in much of the work done in the design fields, the environment or the habitat enters the process of design in two ways. One is either that it sketches a teleological future of a post tipping point of something, whether it is of pollution, whether it is of weather change. So there is always that future that one addresses. And on the other hand, by articulating resources that are somewhere outside the human realm, we want to see if opening up the idea of temporalities and care allows us to think in other ways of engaging with the habitat. So that's broadly the context within which these questions kind of emerged. I'm going to stop sharing my screen just a minute. Has it stopped? No, right?
No, go to your Zoom. If you're on your Zoom thing, you'll see it on the bottom right corner.
Not allowing me to expand it.
So you will have to minimize this window, this browser.
Rohit, you can hear Dipti?
Yeah, I think he's clicked, but it's not responded.
It's not responding.
Okay.
I just read
Okay.
mine.
Okay. Okay. We'll just wait for Rohit to rejoin.
I'm so sorry about that. Something just hung. So these became the context for us uh, to raise these questions. And in opening up a conversation, we invited two prolific academic artist practitioners to engage in a conversation with us and build a provocation based on these questions or other questions that have emerged from their own explorations. So we have with us Mrigank Madhukaila and Jediminas Urbanas. Mrigank is the founder of the Media Lab within the Department of Design IIT. He's been an assistant professor of new media technology and cinema in the Department of Design at Guwahati, IIT Guwahati, since 2005. His background is in quantum mechanics and communication design. He's conducted research and taught at many universities worldwide, and he was a DAD visiting professor at Merz Academy Stuttgart in 2019 and a visiting professor at the China Academy of Arts in Guangzhou in 2016-17. He's the founding member of the art collective Desire Machine Collective, which he was nominated for the Luma Award in 2011. His public platform Periphery, active between 2007 to 2013, was nominated for Visible Award 2015 at the Tate Liverpool. At present, he is developing the research and design studio called Forest Cybernetics. Jediminas Urbanas is an artist, our second panelist, educator and co-founder of the Urbanas Studio, together along with Nomida Urbanas, an interdisciplinary research practice that facilitates exchange amongst diverse nodes of knowledge production and artistic practice in pursuit of projects that transform civic spaces and collective imaginaries. Urbanas have exhibited internationally, including at Sao Paulo, Berlin, Moscow, Lyon, Guangzhou, Busan, Taipei Biennales, Folkestone Triennale, Manifesta and Documenta exhibitions, including a solo show at the Venice Biennale and MACBA in Barcelona. The writing on artistic research as a form of intervention was published in the books Devices for Action, Villa Lithuania, and Public Space Lost and Found. Urbanas curated the Swarm School at the 16 Venice Biennale, Architecture Biennale in 2018. The book Swarms and the New Imagination on the Future of Cohabitation in Art, Architecture, and Philosophy is forthcoming in 2021. So welcome Jediminas and Mrigank. What we'll do is that we will make a short provocation, three provocations, starting first with Gediminas, followed by Mrigank, and then Sabah and me, and then engage in a conversation. So welcome, and Gediminas, I invite you to make your provocation.
Thank you, Rohit. Can I share my screen? Yes. I guess I have some difficulty sharing my. Okay, just a second. I think I have some technical.
Maybe then, if that's the case, then maybe I can ask Mrigank to go, or would you be able to do that?
That would be really great, you know, if I could have like extra minute, because something happened with my laptop.
Okay. Mrigank, would it be possible for you to make the provocation first?
Sure. Okay. So I have 10 minutes, right? So just to let me put a clock so I don't exceed the time. So that will be better. So let me share. Can you see me? See my screen, Rohit? Rohit, can you see my screen?
Rohit, you're mute. Mrigank, your screen is, it says it has started sharing, and double click to enter the full screen mode. So just try doing that, and because nothing otherwise is appearing.
You can't see anything, right?
No, it only says you have started screen sharing, but there's no presentation as such.
Okay. Because when I share, my video will go off. You can only see my screen, so that's fine.
Yeah, that's fine.
Still not working?
Yeah,
now?
This is working. This is working.
Okay, so it's in a minimal view, I think it works. Yeah, okay, fine. So I will start now. So first, I really want to thank you all for the provocation to think together this crucial challenge we have with us. I see the thematic of this symposium as kind of a very interesting provocation. I thank especially, Rupali and all the faculty of School of Environment and Architecture for this opportunity. So I'm thinking that I would be able to add something new to this discussion. So in next 10 minutes, I would like to share a fragment of my current thoughts and regarding some of the ideas and which I've been thinking. So I'll try to respond primarily the four questions in a different way. If something remains unanswered, I really would like to take forward in the discussion more directly. So primarily, I call this presentation an incomplete balance sheet. So in a sense of looking at these questions and starting from my own ideas regarding, largely speaking, the evolving ideas around the ecosystem, ecology, and the idea of pedagogy. So in a sense, I have been thinking a lot since last 4 or 5 years, and my practice has going towards more about looking my own practice as a pedagogical system or ecosystem, and how we're creating different kind of temporary, semi-permanent infrastructures. So I'm quite influenced by this essay by this Chinese American geographer Yifu Tuan, his essay primarily Life as a Field Trip, where he emphasized the importance of experience in engaging with the world. As soon as we are awake, we are in the field experiencing. So in this case, experience is a key word in the humanist geographer's lexicon. So what is it? Simply put, it is how an animal, especially in human animal, apprehends reality through all its senses and mind. So this idea of field was quite pertinent for transforming my own ideas and my practice and my day-to-day life. And I also try to revisit this world field, not history primarily, to overcome history, while reading an ethnographic account from 1933 by this British administrator J.P. Mills, where he, on his essay, Assam as a Field for Research. So in his report, Mills argues that the history of Assam goes back to dimly remembered times when kings reigned the land and Rome was but a small Latin region fighting for its existence against powerful rival state. So in this case, I would like to say that I primarily I'm based in Assam and I work in Assam for last primarily 15 years. And so Assam was the biggest landmass in Asia, populated by very vastly nomadic populations from various races, often described by British colonists as wild, dangerous, and ethnically unidentifiable. The word field I interpreted from my Assamese understanding of the concept of kshetra, that meaning the zone from where one derives experience. Yes.
Mrigang, your screen is blank still. It's a blue blank
Oh.
screen. Yeah. Nothing is happening.
It's going to be blank.
Oh.
So since you were talking, I thought it was meant to be blank.
Sorry. So what do I do?
Yeah, Dipti, you were
Can you see now?
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Because I know sometimes it goes off. So please tell me if it goes. So this absence of reference of Assam or the Northeast frontier in the grand narrative of Indian history is due to its autonomy, fluidity, and unstable geography, various natural calamities, and unstable course of flow of the river Brahmaputra. The interest for imperialists in the geography of Assam came from their exploitation of natural resources such as coal. In order to experience this field, I conducted many experiments, mostly resultant in untimely demise. So most of my experiment, as I was trying to tell you, was the thing, which my archaeologist friends remind me that due to the river, no physical structure is permanent in this geography. So I don't want to go. So in this case, I was fascinated with this Kondrativ wave of the Russian economists, where the change of the sinusoidal change of material cultures and material and technology, and how the world goes through different changes and impermanence. So it's not only the river, but the change, this wave of technology. Actually, I needed to make it big. I don't know why it is not working. One sec. Can you see it now?
It's the same screen.
It's presenting it.
There is a GIF, but it's not playing. That is the main. I had prepared it, but it's not.
The presentation has stopped.
Okay, so I cannot play. Now you can see it. So it doesn't go full screen for some reason. So anyways, so while I thought this.
The presentation has stopped, Mrigang.
Can you see now?
Yes.
Is it okay now?
Yeah.
Is it fine?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So in that regard, that what I was trying to tell, that this impermanence, this led me to see the semi-permanent structures and the world in a very different light. So in this case, I actually refer to a very interesting idea on failure, or this kind of, which also many pedagogical experiments like Bauhaus or many other systems which was envisioned in the world, which had untimely or timely demise. I came across Appadurai's very interesting thesis on failure. So in this world, primarily the Wall Street and Silicon Valley, the two worlds promote the illusion that scarcity can send can and should be eliminated in the age of seamless flow. So instead, Papadora proposed a habitual and strategic failure by exploring debt, crisis, digital divides, and disconnectivity. So moving between planned obsolescence and deliberate precariousness of digital technology and the too big to fail logic of the Great Recession. So they argue the sense of failure is real and it is produces disappointment and pain, but there's something need to be learned from this failure. So failure is not a self-evident quality of projects, institutions. Technology is our life. So this we are also probably thinking at this moment. So it requires a new urgent understanding of the condition under which repeated breakdowns and collapses are quickly forgotten. So this was currently, for example, this was not the first pandemic. This is not the first structural transformation of technology. So in a sense, this could be a great tool to push ahead. So this book referring to a multi-layered account of failure and general theory of denial, memory and nation system of control offers a very good philosophical tool to think through. So that is the reason where I actually started the project Assembly of Desire, which was conceived as an open system without pretending or to draw any conclusion at the call. So I just didn't had any outcome in my mind. So the meeting was planned in the winter of 2017-18 on the Majuli Island, supposed to be the biggest river island on the planet, on Brahmaputra, as the river has been the biggest, lesson giver or teacher for many of the communities living nearby. So I invited like many friends and colleagues around the world to rethink or to reorganize together and receive the flow of affirmation in response. There was not even the option of not to assemble or question the possibility of dissocial, as it was necessity to address these questions. All public spaces were taken down. There is also a certain performative and choreographic aspect to assembling on this island. So the possibility was to collective renunciation was important, as there was no cure to this depression. The only possibility was to bring together the network of friendship and philosophy in which we were organized. So here, basically, that I was, like maybe a very stupidly, I was connecting the root of philosophy and friendship. The root is love, or like the philos. So it's somewhere so it became very imperative to crucial to realize that nothing distinguishes oneself or a group ontologically from a crystal, plant, an animal, or order of the world. We are drifting together towards the noise and the black depth of the universe. And our diverse systemic complexions are flowing up the entropic stream towards the solar origin itself adrift. So we have to construct or reorganize ourselves in a different...
Mrigang?
Yeah.
I'm very sorry to intervene.
Yeah, I can hear you.
The screen is stuck at slide number 14. If in case you're moving ahead, the presentation isn't moving. I mean, it's not going, we can't see the slides. It's on slide number 14 still.
I'm sorry. So it's stopping again and again. I'm sorry. So I have to do it again and again. So it's fine. I'm really sorry. So
that's okay.
So so through this thing, which the various infrastructures, I would say, like my work with IIT Guwahati in the Media Lab with my students, or various semi-permanent system, like as you see in different parts of India or in Assam. So this infrastructure with students and friends is led me to think, this Francisco Varela's idea work on subjectivity and consciousness through biology. So basically, it's very simply looking at how the human beings or communities as a biological ecosystem. So it is like this presence a subjectivity that is radically intertwined with its biological and physical roots. So it must be understood within the framework of theory of a concrete embodied dynamics grounded in the general theory of autonomous systems. So it is, so Varela's main contribution to our understanding of the generation of consciousness in the framework of what we call his biophysics of being. So anyways, this collapse, I can say that I was seeing it coming. So so here this present day's crisis, if you can look at three global changes: the rise of non-Western powers, the crisis of environmental sustainability, and the loss of authoritative sources. So this itself demanded a kind of new regeneration of curriculum or pedagogy, where I could see that the only resilient infrastructure in the world could be building new pedagogical systems. So this is something which please tell me if you still stop seeing the
It's moved ahead.
Yeah, can you see it now? Yeah. Yeah. So this is the book which is probably I have sent, and if I can send the PDF to almost of you. So I don't know how much time I have, but
Go ahead.
so this knowledge and its lesser form information can be considered as an ecology. So I started from this Varela's idea, and many splendid jungle brought about by evolution. Such knowledge can decode or read reality as in science. So it can create new realities through the application of science, or it can create reality as in stories, art, etc. So it can transform reality as in some mind, body, and non-human technologies. So similarly, we need to store all our books or information in different ways. So it is like that is where we are doing that. So dealing with the ecology with the dead, my friend, whose books has led me to also think more about Professor Andres Weber would say that death is individuality inverted. So he paraphrases Hannah Arendt that human as a being of flesh and blood that can only exist through relationships. So so in reclaiming this process of building relationships, so so I started seeing the forest or this kind of biological ecosystems as a very productive way to look at. So I come back to the conclusion. So basically, I don't want to take more time. So here now, the attempt is to create a kind of think tank or school in this in a more open, in a non-academic framework, to investigate the transdisciplinary and intersectional pathway of pedagogy, philosophy, ecology, and focusing on non-Western way of living. So this is, some of you know about. This is a bridge with no authorship built in Meghalaya, and so this is a kind of systemic model under which I have been thinking for a long time, that how the school could through research, dialogue, and reassembling the diverse communities of the social, how to rethink Asia through ancient perspective and beyond interconnected histories, geographical or political boundaries. So it will rediscover sustainable living tradition and redefine ideas and resources of ecologists from the perspective of rivers and forests. So the school will be geographically located in the northeast of India and within the setting of unique biodiversity and a truly alchemist setting, and will be linked with initiative taking place also in other locations in India and wherever. So it will bring together students, artists, filmmakers, architects, activists, curators who want to assemble. So this is, I could say that the transformation of this, coming together assembly has transformed into a form of a school. So I will stop here. So this is a, I think I don't, so if anybody want to see the film of assembly, this is a QR code, you can just store it, and, or I can, find the link to you. So thanks.
Thanks a lot, Mrigan. That was a lovely provocation. I take 3 points away from your presentation over here. First, the deployment of memory in the face of practices of forgetting and collapse, which are repetitive. The second, the mobilization of what you termed as love, but a kind of practice or a politics of love within friendship and philosophy. And this becomes very important as we kind of think through ideas of care, but also that, in terms of research, and investigation, academic investigations have been more open to studying conflict or discussing conflict. Whereas the domain of love has been discussed in the realm of literature, poems, so on and so forth. Not really in the disciplines of the built environment. So that's a lovely provocation. And the third one is that the proposition on the school based on non-Western epistemologies. So thank you. I will now invite Gediminas to make his provocation.
Wow, thank you. This is really great to be part of this discussion and this conversation. And I truly inspired by Mriganka's provocation. Thank you. And thank you, Mriganka, for letting me to adjust my cables. I think I had a problem with, So to start with, I want to really thank School of Environment and Architecture and all the wonderful collective and Rupali and Rohit and Saba for organizing this event. So let me try to share my screen. I hope I will succeed now. Okay. I hope you can see. Do you see?
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Okay, so as Rohit introduced briefly, my name is Gediminas Urbonas. I originally come from Lithuania. And together with my partner Nameda, we have joint practice based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where we work at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And our work often engages scientists and experts from other fields. And just, I don't think so I have a good internet connection, so I will stop my camera and just to have better connection. So we are, in our practice, we're interested in art that works as a catalyzer for a dialogue between diverse fields of knowledge production. Here we raise questions about the role of art and its capacity to destabilize logic of science and suggest an alternative imagination. And we think that it is essential to rethink and reconsider themes that may sound already resolved, raise irritant questions, and interrogate uncanny matters. And one of such irritant and uncanny themes or subjects or interest is swamp. So swamp, as we know, is often compared with hell. Drain the swamp is a slogan that comes from political rhetoric, which I'm sure we are familiar not only from American tradition but Italian, and many other colonial politics. However, if we take a risk to dive into the swamp, we realize that swamp is more than just a metaphor that signifies uncivilized mud or mess. Swamp unfolds as perfect organized biosphere, as a habitat of diverse knowledges with its own stack of historic, cultural, cybernetic ontologies. It is a multifaceted model through which we can look at the complexities of our planet and relations between living and more than living beings and realize that swamp is an interface of Gaia. Such articulation of swamp relates to a critical zone concept suggested by French philosopher Bruno Latour and investigated at the exhibition with the same title at ZKM Art and Media Center in Karlsruhe, Germany. So swamp as a critical zone is understood as an endangered ecosystem that reached a critical point as well as a critical position of the swamp researcher in regards to resource depletion, exhaustion of the environment. Humans drained swamps and extracted peat without understanding that swamps are most productive sink of carbon and methane, even 3 times surpassing capacity of rainforest or ocean algae. Scientific studies on economic value of ecosystems identify the wetland as the most valuable compared to lakes, forests, rivers, and oceans. Wetlands are kidneys of the planet. They collect and distribute water, filter pollutants in the environment, serve as habitats for plants and animals, and also are object of scientific and even artistic research. Our swamp research combines I think, okay. Do you hear me well?
We couldn't hear you.
And do you see the image?
Yeah, now we do. Yeah.
Everything is okay. Okay, good. So our swamp research, and here I'm talking about the swamp school, combines scientific knowledge and artistic vision. Through the swamp school, we develop tools that invite participants to learn from the swamp through sensory experience and thus experience the so-called hybrid knowledge or other ways of knowing the world. Here we raise questions about instability, about what cities, materials, technologies of the future could be and what pedagogy should be developed to meet the challenges of the future climate. With the ongoing climate change, with the ongoing debate on climate change and rising sea levels, when oceans sink larger areas of land, we argue that the question is to not how preserve cities by building barriers and walls, and not how to adapt, but how to imagine a different climate. Expansion of human settlements, industrial revolution, and modernity did their best to drain swamps. Along with the swamps, other knowledges were also eliminated, the so-called indigenous epistemologies, or autochthonous knowledges, if you will. Therefore, the swamp school proposed the concept of amphibious pedagogy, which would help to learn from the hybridity of the swamps, from coexistence with other forms of thinking, to learn sympoetics and making a world together. So here the swamp school suggests research on invisible architecture. And this inspiration on invisible architecture comes from Juan Downey, who spent time with Yanomami people in 70s, trying to understand daily gestures and daily life. And this interest in elusive materials and processes that produce space is inscribed as in the core of the amphibious pedagogy, here, where the sound, the smell, taste, vibration, and listening are basic elements of learning from the environment and also producing the space. Listening is important not only with ears, but also with bones, with the whole body, as a way of acknowledging other ways of cognition and other ways of perception. So we see the school as infrastructure for interspecies communication, dedicated to listening of the voices of polluted planet or damaged planet, if you will, and also dedicated to physical experience of instability, you know. And here I'm showing one of the iterations of the swamp school that is appropriating the plastic pipes that typically is used for draining the water into and constructing the playground as kind of like extended infrastructure of the school, as the classroom that is built in the environment. So For us, the swamp school is important as a form. On one hand, extending the dialectics with the idea of the social sculptures proposed by Joseph Beuys, where participants contribute to something more than just object of art, performance, or representation, something that has a capacity of a political event. On the other hand, we are also interested in the idea of a pragmatic fiction, where work of art engages in solving the challenges of life, the environment, or science, and offers a fiction, undiscovered connections, new materials, or new technology. Rendering of such pragmatic fictions or representation about future of our planet and its change of perspective. Thus, a question, how to create imagination beyond human perception or based on the logic of other life forms. Whether it could be a plant or a mushroom. Along the words of biologist Scott Gilbert, human bodies and our thinking are products of daily co-production of humans, of bacteria and microbes. So the political question and the question of imagination is how to decenter the human and look from other species' point of view at the ecology surrounding us. Thus, we discussed how human habitats could be designed from the earth, is humus, where living organisms act as extension of our body, ensuring the well-being of organisms and their immunity.
Thank you.
And here, I think I can stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Gediminas. That was really lovely. A second proposition of the school, and in terms of both these propositions of the school, they have been around thinking of the field as a school in itself, where again you put forth the idea of indigenous epistemologies, the coming together, or rather using the role of arts to explore newer imaginations, also combining them with science. Second thing. The third proposition that you kind of put forth, which was around using certain kinds of methodologies. First, listening, the use of fiction, new materials and new technologies that can come from the swamp itself. And the fourth, which is central, is thinking of the swamp as an infrastructure for holding wetness in the present, in the context or the future that we are staring at. So lovely, thank you for this. And it is in fact that last point, which is what I want to start off with in our presentation, which is, but what I want to do is, I want to go the other way around. If swamps or forests, as Dilip Dikuna kind of articulates, are infrastructures of holding wetness, then what makes infrastructures of draining wetness durable, in spite of them being constantly defeated by the rain and the monsoon over here in our climate? So what is it that makes them durable? What are the set of relationships that makes them durable? Are there any extant practices from those relationships itself that can provide openings to think about futures? So instead of kind of starting with infrastructures of holding wetness, we started with infrastructures of draining wetness to see what kind of relationships make them durable, or attempt to make them durable, and to see if any extant practices open out from them. And in that, we too kind of have been engaged in practices of listening to stories of households as they experience the monsoon, both its everyday wetness and its extreme events. Just a minute. Sabha, can you start the presentation?
Yes.
I'm going to share a link where some of our work is put up, because I'm going to go very quickly, okay, the first part of the presentation. I'm going to tell you all a story. Followed, and this draws to the work, this draws towards the idea of temporalities, followed with uh, Sabha, who will open out the idea of care within that.
Is
So,
my screen visible to all?
yes, Sabha.
Okay.
Go to the next slide.
Yes, Rohit. Just a second.
So, in the context of discussions around weather change and rising seas, um, we've kind of opened out what the current conversation is around. And what happens in that conversation, one thing that we've realized, the mobilization of the climate change discourse uh, is responsible for weakening or disempowering the claims for a wide range of low-income groups. Therefore, one of the things that has happened is that along with thinking about imaginatively in terms of our futures, Nikhil Anand, one of the scholars whom we are kind of collaborating on the project, whose website I share the link with, also argues that any kind of thinking about the future also has to be just. But if thinking about the future has to be just, how do households, of a majority of groups experience, sorry, rather, in the meantime, how do a majority of households experience, respond to, and innovate in the process of inhabiting monsoon's wetness in Mumbai? This is the question that we pursue further. Go to the next slide, Sabha. And we're engaged in this work in an estuarine landscape of one of the Mumbai's rivers, called as the Daisar River, which originates from a forest and sneaks through an entire landscape that consists of um, forest land, which is disappearing, mud flats, mangroves, before it goes and meets the sea. And if this whole city of Bombay, which is actually an inhabited sea or inhabitation within an estuary that people are inhabiting, how do households experience, respond to, and innovate in their responses to wetness? So I'll tell you a very short story of one household that lives in what we've come to call as a chawl. Popularly, they're uh, 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 referred to as slums. This is the story of a household living in a chawl, and we have engaged in studying 4 neighborhoods with different kinds of, with housing in different kinds of building typologies. That includes Wardi's old agrarian housing. It includes bungalows, low-rise as well as high-rise apartments, all different kinds of typologies, which exist cheek by jowl in this estuarine landscape. So let me go through this story very quickly. On the eve of independence, the land in Ambepada, now known as Ambewadi, was settled by a North Indian community who reared cow sheds along the Daisar River. Next, during as their owners saw a financial opportunity to construct and rent a single room, 2 low-income migrant households. A dense, incrementally transformed settlement emerged over 50 years, being organized as chawls along streets leading to a river. Next, following a paralytical attack, a shopkeeper from Mumbai's eastern suburbs purchased one such tenement from the cattle shed owner and came to live here with his young son, as he found social networks amongst his linguistic Gujarati-speaking community. He had retired from his utensil selling business due to the paralytic attack and sold his older house to purchase this tenement while keeping money aside to live his life. A small kitchenette was retrofitted near the wall facing the street, where everyday washing routines of washing and socializing unfolded amongst other households. Next, in the mid 2000s, a household comprising a young married couple and their son from the same linguistic community rented the next door tenement from the erstwhile cattle shed owner, who had now become a small developer of many such jobs. The woman worked in a beauty parlor while developing her own network of an independent clientele, while her husband worked as an Ola cab driver. By this time, the retired shopkeeper had retrofitted a mezzanine loft and tiled internal walls of the house up to the lintel level. A small channel to drain water from washing clothes and utensils was also constructed when the local corporator's funds were invested into paving of the street. Next, within a decade, the disabled shopkeeper retrofitted a toilet cum bath in his house, while the beautician's household retrofitted a bath in their house. These retrofits were made soon after the municipal sewage connection was extended to the public toilet through the corporator's fund. Meanwhile, the grown-up son of the retired shopkeeper does not work, while the beautician's son works part-time in a hotel while completing his bachelor's degree of commerce. The next, so what we see over the last 50 years, the chawl has transformed from being tenements that were rented by single migrant labor to single or joint family households. And the composition of these households changes. And the space or the life spaces of the house start transforming with several changes within the household. Go next. With the walls permeable to soak wetness, monsoon's everyday dampness pervades the tenement much beyond into the winter. It leads to fungal moths, mold, bedbug, and termite attacks during the monsoon, along with a stench of dampness, a cycle which repeats year after year. The walls remain damp through the whole year up to a level of 2 feet. Dampness leads to allergies and respiratory diseases, especially in young children. Each household ends up spending approximately 5 to 8,000 rupees, that is 75 to 100 US dollars, for cleaning the residues that cause illness, painting walls, and repairing and mending things that might have become brittle due to the monsoon's everyday wetness. Next, the shopkeeper remembers instances of flooding in the settlement in 1998, 2005, 2008, and 2017. In an event of flood, water enters tenements with a force that can not only affect the structure, but also carries with it sludge, debris, and other biotic and abiotic substances that accumulate in the tenement. In such instances, inhabitants of these tenements shift onto the mezzanine loft or find refuge on the terraces of public toilets. If such events are particularly severe, as is the case of the 2005 flood, missionary schools end up opening their halls for the tenement residents to live, while religious institutions come to provide food and clothing. When households have to employ labor for cleaning, repair, and mending the tenement, the cost can rise up to 20,000 rupees, $300, which is a significant financial implication. The fear of occurrence of such events also has gendered implications. Working women in the settlement, such as the beautician, have to stay back at home and miss work to keep a watch on children, belongings, and valuables from being washed away. Men usually perform this role at night, where rotating duties are assigned to male members in the community to monitor the rise of water in the stormwater drain that works as an information system for the sign of flooding. Next, the possibilities of retrofitting mezzanine loft have allowed for these tenements to function to the rhythm of cyclical time of the monsoon. Mezzanine lofts reduce the heat transfer to the lower level during summer for the storage of valuables and goods, and also for living. One, in fact, observes 4 instances of cyclical change in the yearly activities to gear the space of the tenement for the change in seasons, a possibility afforded much more by this type as against others we encountered in our study. Next. So a whole range of repair and retrofit practices with knowledges, skills, and people who are present in the neighborhood come to transform this built form. Go next. But what is critical over here is that each stage of the spatial transformation of the built form could be read through formal processes such as layering, folding, shading, fission, and fusion, which we have come to term in borrowing from geological and biological metaphors as the architecture of exfoliation. So, what we want to do, next slide, please. We want to see what is it that makes wet, what is it that makes this infrastructure of draining wetness durable. And it is four things that we have come to kind of identify that weave in life. First is processes of settling. Second, our life spaces and the practices in those life spaces that absorb everyday life. Third, aqueous flows, everyday aqueous flows and these extreme events, and the material practices of making of built form, which have all of these have their own temporalities, and they weave with one another to produce this built form. And we come to pose our exfoliation as a kind of way of building on the forest metaphor over here, which kind of Dikuna's work has kind of proposed as an infrastructure of holding wetness. The analogy of the metaphor or analogy of exfoliation would allow us to kind of carry the thinking in terms of form as well as processes further to think of the future of built form. So I'll hand it over to Sabha to kind of open out two other contexts where we have opened out practices of care. You can go ahead from these slides. This is the work that we've been doing across a diversity of build forms. Yes, Sabha, you can go.
Okay. Thank you, Rohit. Sorry. Yeah. So care in inhabitation. So Devash said, who during his dissertation opens up the idea of conviviality through reading and mapping the sense landscape of dogs in intense human habitation. He starts with mapping the landscape through the human eye, or as humans perceive. Sorry. He then followed the dogs in this neighborhood, trying to understand the nature of smell and its point of intensities that further disintegrates to understand the possible geometry of smell. Okay. The drawing is then overlaid by the agency, that is the wind, that affects them and determines the flowy nature of smell. On the right, what you see is the identification and focusing of spots where the intensity of the smell is most, and these spots become their spots of comfort and enjoyment. The final drawing of how the dog see and navigates its world through scent is what you can see here. He concludes that the strange inhabitations allow different kinds of relationships to occur between humans and animals at multiple levels, allowing multiple possible existences and coexistences through not one but multiple agencies and through many forms of conviviality. Care in post-extractive environment.
One point over here, Sabha, before you go ahead.
Yeah.
In thinking about interspecies cohabitation, here the idea, what we had proposed, what we had done in the earlier work on showing work around wetness, the aspect of listening to household. In this work on interspecies cohabitation, Devash focuses on close looking, close visual observation to map the sensorium, which then, where he tries to look or identify the possible spheres of conviviality that become ways of thinking about entering the notions of care. Go ahead.
Care in post-extractive environment. This is one of the studies by Vastavikta for her research project of post-intensive landscapes, where she was studying the Goa mining sites. And in the big, what emerges is that in the big conflict that has happened in the post-mining landscape of Goa between the mining companies and some sections of elite civil societies and the state, the first wants to pursue mining and the second wants to close it down. In this conflict, non-human nature has taken over the landscape. However, village communities do not think of these extremities. They want to advance intergenerational mining along with some farming activities, while the group of miners and truckers are left behind. Think of the futures in terms of scavenging the materials that are left behind the mining economy. This was also a studio that one of the batches did as the settlement studies and opened upon these ideas. Um, yeah. And with that, I'll just like to pose the following question, that how do we think of care in such varied fields and in different situated aspirations of different groups and new non-human natures that have emerged in these varying landscapes?
Thanks. Thanks. So that's where we end. We kind of took out three of those contexts that we had opened out to mobilize ideas of temporality and care over here. So we'll stop with our presentation. What we can do is that we can kind of we can make quick comments, suggestions, observations, or questions, Gediminas and Mrigank, of the synergies, the divergences that exist in our work and what it means in terms of thinking about pedagogy. Thinking through all the three of them together, possibly spend together 15 minutes and then open it out for discussion. Yeah. So maybe a short comment of around 2 to 3 minutes from both of you, from all of us, followed by responses. So I'll invite Mrigank to comment on the three works, followed by Gediminas and then us.
Thank you, Rohit. I think first I would, I was quite intrigued by your and Sabah's presentation. It's quite fascinating, especially I think the work being shown in that illustrative manner. And primarily, I quite like this kind of dynamic housing pattern, which I'm aware of, even though I'm not a resident of Bombay, but it's quite, interesting, treatment of temporality, as well as this, changing the rhythm. It's just like according to seasons. So it's like moving according to time. So primarily, I was quite fascinated with this, like the house doesn't remain static or kind of permanent. So it's how with seasons. So it's a kind of quite a beautiful way of interpreting that. So similarly, I think there is, I guess, you are deriving so many things from your field, and that how also one could see the pedagogy, like requires that kind of dynamic positioning with various changes of currents. So I like this, this changing infrastructure, which is I think one could derive from your work. And also similarly from Gedimina's work, which is quite fascinating. Similarly, I think somewhere, I think you have put together so many, we have so much commonality where we are kind of looking at things that, where Gedimina's were, deriving from swamp and creating infrastructure, and how, I think there is an active idea of learning. So that is not something that there is this division of someone who is feeding that system. So it's like also that everybody is a learner. So that kind of also excites me. I guess that makes you humble, and that makes you an active participant with the environment. So I think it's quite fascinating. I really liked.
Thanks, Mrigank. Would you like to follow up, Gediminas?
Yeah, thank you. This was absolutely exciting and extraordinary quality. I really appreciate the sensibility of the line and the drawing, you know, and of course, you know, we could just dedicate, you know, all the discussion to articulation of the line, you know, as it is such an important concept. You know, as you know, again, we are talking about not only the boundaries and contours, but we're talking also about porosities, and we're talking also about leaking boundaries. You know, when not only from one discipline to another, but which is like very much interesting, you know, to me, and that approach was also in the core of the Swamp School. You know, how can we sort of like find another way to discuss interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity, you know, it's kind of like leaking boundaries, you know. What, you know, where I was really compelled, you know, seeing the Corbusier man, you know, the figure, and I was like almost like, you know, wanting like, you know, like to imagine amphibian figure, you know, to imagine, you know, something that, you know, can really propose, you know, a different, you know, signifier for the coming age, you know, whatever you call it, coming age, water age, you know, maybe a wetland age, you know, maybe virus age, you know. So what could be that figure, you know, because definitely is not that, you know, man, you know, and it is really interesting along the lines of, you know, new Bauhaus, you know, what is being kind of like now discussed since last year in European Union, you know, so, you know, so would be really, I think you are in this kind of like, you know, position where, you know, to really come up with, you know, proposition that is counter this kind of like, you know, Bauhaus narrative, you know, because you are already living that condition, living that uncertainty. And for me, well, you know, was, you know, definitely, you know, compelling, you know, to see the change of perspective, you know, how the urbanism, you know, again, coming from the idea of rhythm analysis, you know, referring to Lefebvre's idea, how these kind of like, you know, daily rhythms, you know, can be articulated. Here, you know, following the inspiration and you know, the core idea actually of the, you know, pedagogy is like learning from the other, right? Like so just sort of like seeing how you building the form, how you are articulating the space, you know, inspired by other sensibilities forms, you know, like whether it could be smells, you know, of the dog, you know, and this is like, you know, quite extraordinary actually to think about olfactory, which is such a I don't want to say unexplored territory, but in a way it is like forgotten territory, right? You know, we have even like very limited vocabulary to describe, you know, the smell, you know, kind of like, you know, maybe only our attitudes toward kind of like repulsiveness or attractiveness, right? You know, but how about all these like, you know, thousands kind of like of shades and nuances and so on and so forth, right? You know, so I think this is what I'm like really you know, learning from your work is about the importance of the change of the perspective, you know, which can open up other ways of knowing. So it's no longer kind of like, you know, this disposition, you know, for us thinking of whether, you know, drying or wettening, you know, but like really acquiring modern human perspective.
Thanks.
I would like to add one more thing, if there is time. I would like to say something.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think it's quite provocative. I think somewhere, I think you know, there is a whole response what Gediminas is saying that, opening up for various perspectives. So there's a whole attempt, not even now since 50s, from primarily from, like, Japan or Southeast Asia, that to overcome the modernity project. So somewhere this is also an opportunity to, multi-perspectivism, or like, this kind of, and not trying to desire stability through this kind of, organizing cities, organizing human being. And I guess some of you probably also, the people are discussing this kind of questions, which is in, I think, one of the I think Prasad and Rupali was there at part of the Istanbul, where the idea of are we human? So definitely there's questioning about this humanness and its trajectory. So definitely in here, the school, which for me is also like primarily, I think in both your proposals, similar. I see myself. We are thinking that I guess we are all seeing as an ecosystem. So for me, it's an ecosystem. It's not another infrastructure which to create a set of new things. So it's also about one, in a very humble way, saying coexistence with some of the things. Like, for example, when I did assembly, but there was a very impossible proposition. So I actually wanted to invite an elephant, someone who was working with elephant sounds, and what are various worlds which was possible, because what we are trying to protect is a human world. So I guess the limitation of any pedagogy or any way of living is somewhere the limits of humanness. So somewhere this wetness or the swampness, or how a forest could ecologically protect certain other infrastructures. So there has been this way to defeat this modernist logic, so this modern way of living. So I guess it is not AI, but I guess we can attempt this without responding to technological artificial intelligence. So somewhere this need to be dealt with in a very everyday way. So I guess that's.
Thanks. Thanks, Mrigan. Sabha, do you want to come in?
Yeah, more like a comment as to, I mean, I'm just being overwhelmed with the landscape of different contexts that are being put forth, and where Gediminas is talking about, Mrigank is in some ways talking about giving upon some epistemologies, and and Gediminas is talking about talking of indigenous epistemologies, and with that and with different contexts. I mean, it's firstly, thank you, Mrigank and Gediminas, for presenting your thoughts. And it's I mean, I'm trying to articulate question here as to then having coming from these different contexts, what would be the possible, I mean, in our own ways we are doing and practicing in engaging in our works with the students, but what if we have to expand upon um, um, the methodologies of engaging with these ideas further, what could be the possible actions, or some notes to build upon from just taking from this discussion? Yeah.
Thanks. So for me, I mean, the kind of commonalities that firstly emerged across all of our works over here was posing the idea of learning in the field and the school that you almost emphatically articulated, the swarm school, or the school of as Mriganka posed, a school of non-Western methodologies of thinking through the forest, right? And we, in our case, simply posed it as the idea of fieldwork, that the post-institution, in a certain sense, demands moving outside the school to learn. That's number one. And therefore, the school emerges as a set of relations between differently situated people, whether as learners, coming from different standpoints into this. So that kind of stands out very strongly over here. The second point that kind of comes across as a synergy in terms of thinking about all of these different contexts that we've been trying to open up is that all of us seem to have been interested in something that is not permanent, that changes, that transforms, may also have a death associated with it. So this thing of moving beyond permanence is something that the inquiry to look for something that is beyond permanence is something that emerges as a common strand of inquiry across all of these works. The third thing, which is kind of strongly emerges, is methodological, posing questions about epistemology or ontological questions in terms of thinking about these differently situated temporal habitats that opens out ways of thinking, and concurrently along with them, ways of seeing ranging from not only from visual observation but to listening, hearing, and other employing other senses. The fourth commonality that kind of emerges in pushing things through over here is the idea of deploying art, or the idea of imagination, of creating eidetic worlds that become important to shape new imaginations. Okay? So these are the four things that kind of emerge as synergies between all our works. And I want to kind of pose two questions at this moment. My first question is to Gediminas, and I really loved your work. In your work, you propose the swamp as the perfect world, and one of the things that strikes me, kind of being situated here in Bombay, is when urbanization changes a swamp. Does it, like what we have seen, and our colleagues, I don't have photographs with me right now, but colleagues, if you look up this website called as the Marine Life of Mumbai, at some point, they have been mapping the marine life in the intertidal zone of Bombay. Neither land nor water in between that. And they've identified organisms or marine life that has emerged particularly in response to this urban habitat. That Bombay as a city, in terms of its ecology or its marine life, they argue is maybe much more closer to Singapore than it is to a small village just 100 kilometers south of Bombay. That's number one. They've also kind of identified that organisms have started transforming in this habitat. And they kind of often use the example of what they call as a plastic catcher, which is a small organism. I don't know its biology, I don't know its scientific name, but this plastic catcher catches the plastic waste that gets dumped in Bombay's creeks and the sea as a defense mechanism to protect itself. And it just started transforming its form. So in that sense, the swarm as a perfect world, when it kind of encounters urbanization, what I'm proposing is that it might show transformations, and that itself is not, it's not the perfect world, but there's some change that is taking place within it, that it's not cyclical. That's a question. So such encounters, have you been able to observe in your work, or do you only see the swamp as this kind of cyclical perfect world? That's a question that I had. And for Mrigang, I really loved your propositions. I really loved your propositions, and I would ask you, to open out, if you could, a little bit more on your proposition of thinking about love as a form of friendship. Could you discuss more the coordinates through which we could
build on.
So shall I?
Yes.
Shall I respond? Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Rohit, for such a meticulous articulation of the four commonalities. And you know, my spontaneous take, you know, responding to how the you know, how the swamp is actually evolving ecosystem, right? You know, is that is precisely kind of like that. It contradicts human understanding of the environment as natural and as pristine, right? And I see swamp as organism. You know, I see swamp as really a complex system. Meriganko was just sharing, you know, his interest in ecosystems, right? As kind of like, you know, where the social organization and biological organization could meet and inspire, you know, human forms of organization. You know, and this fascination has histories, you know, in cybernetics, right? Manchester cybernetician Stafford Beer, you know, when he was commissioned to design the cyber scene by the Allende's government in Chile, you know, he was observing swamps. Okay, he was observing ponds, you know, but I'm kind of like, you know, I'm getting my inspiration, you know, thinking that he was observing swamps as well, you know. Just perhaps, you know, British did not want to acknowledge that, you know, and they say, you know, and they use this like more civilized version, like saying ponds, you know, but he got really interested in the intelligence, and I think Mriganka also mentioned, you know, earlier, you know, like the, you know, this kind of like not dry intelligence that comes with our artificial intelligence systems, you know, but wet intelligence, you know, that is inherent in these forms, and this intelligence is profound, you know, and of course it will, as any milieu, you know, it will eat all the plastic, you know, and all the pollutant, you know, and it's, you know, and this is like, you know, our very romantic idea that this is so pristine and clean, right? You know, this, no, it is like, of course it is, you know, this swamp is dirty, right? And perhaps, you know, you need Bataille, you know, imagination, you know, like to speak about the dirtiness, you know, and to speak about uncanniness, you know, and to speak about, you know, unfathomable, you know, unimaginable, right? Dimension of the swamp, and that's why we need to change the perspective and think beyond the human, you know, beyond this kind of like modernist, you know, human, you know, where we're trying to sort of like parcel everything into dry and wet, you know, where hybridities, you know, the uncanny hybridities are impossible, right, to imagine, you know, or to deal with, right? So yes, I see the swamp as a learning environment, and therefore the swamp school, right? Because it allows us to really think, you know, to engage this uncanny kind of like, you know, yeah, dimension, right? And uncanny dimension. And if you look at the human history, like for example, Great Dismal Swamp, you know, that became a refuge for the runaway slaves, for the runaway African American slaves, you know, from the 1600s and 17, you know, throughout the 1700s in the United States, you know, that you know. That is also kind of like, you know, speaking about swamps as being also perhaps, you know, for me, this, your provocation, Rohit, when you said about jest, you know, like how this future we can, you know, we can imagine as also jest, you know. So I see kind of like, you know, this precisely this swamp, this muddy, you know, uncanny kind of like swamp as also, and formless swamp, constantly in becoming, right? That has also a potentiality of contributing to this just idea of the just environment. So yeah, so this is my very spontaneous response.
Thanks. That was very useful.
Yeah. Mrigan, would you like to respond?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Rohit, for again, yet another interesting provocation. So, even if in a Anglo-Saxon, definition or the Western philosophical, but let's say this idea of love, which is the basis which I based that assembly, which was primarily, which if you call the love and philosophy, friendship. So, which is what also Plato talks about it, but in a sense, from a non-Western perspective. Love this a lot of even militant philosophers are talking about it nowadays, is that it's connected to self-negation. So once you negate this modernist subjectivity, then you enter a different kind of network, which is basically which is lost connection network of human, animals, plants, and different elements. So which is primarily I can say I'm a bit lucky that it's not very far from where I'm located to enter these things, and I'm sometimes I feel like shame that that somewhere there are parallel universes which is cannot be adapted. Saying that, so like for example, this idea came about that when we all were looking at the Brazil, the Amazon forest fires. So it was happening in the screen as you see, and we are doing all sorts of responses in internet. Similarly, it happened last year in Assam, like an oil incident, a forest which is a big reservoir to uh, a lot of natural species. So in that way, so forest actually soaks up. If you know, so we are actually going anti-scientific, being modern. So in a sense, also Bruno Latour, as also Gediminas was talking about. So forests soak up carbon dioxide and helps global temperature from rising. It stops. It's a very practical things we need. So there are also practical way to know how to grow forest. So this island is also host a very famous person, a small farmer. Since 30 years, he's growing a forest. His name is Jadab Payeng. So sometimes also, I would say I also have the tendency to go on a utopian floating ideas, but somewhere there are practical things to grow forests. So there is a sense of when this is happening that we are destroying forests by our actions, by building cities or various infrastructures. I say we are desynchronized. We are not connected to the time, as you guys very nicely shown some of the field notes. I would see as a field note from Bombay, and I would love to go and see some of these places. So similarly, the Bruno, I think he is right in a sense. We say that ultimately right now more people are dying from mental illness than road accident or terrorist attacks. So in a sense, what also responds to Qatar is like a speculation that mental ecology. So ecology is not that we are behaving as if we are outside of it. So this disease and this way. So I see a possibility. This friendship is not only between humans. I think the friendship, this architecture is also architecture of this love is also through other entities in this circuit. So I guess we need to. So there could be a curriculum of resilience. So how I think we need to share the curriculum of resilience in the time of this, not only technological. So as we see that forest stands as a system of knowledge, for me is more or less whichever. So in the studio, which or the school which I see is kind of as also Gary has reminded, it's like a very cybernetic project to be said. The research is primarily how forests could be core in the reorganizing the world or reorganizing. So one could see very clearly that how the World Brain project of H.G. Wells was taken over by Google, by the World Encyclopedia. So there is a lot of thing. So similarly, there is an ontological breakdown as we see that where when today the heat is high because the information and the biology, the noosphere and the biosphere are somehow it is getting connected. And so somewhere this through this infrastructure, if we not build a network of friendship, it will be irreversible. So somewhere as I think both your urgency, both other projects, I think Gediminas and Rohit and Sabah, what you presented, I think I see that I guess there's a preparation. There is a preparation or a development of a curriculum for whether we call it learning of the senses, the learning of to be in the planet. So I see, at least from my point of view, that was the only point which I could develop with my students, based on the thing, and that is the only way, or my friends, I could say, that would be based on this common philosophy. So that is, I don't know whether I gave you the proper answer.
No, absolutely. Both yours and Gedimina's, the way you all kind of respond are useful to kind of build and connect to us, our work in terms of thinking about care. So that's a useful proposition to kind of build on.
Rohit, may I intervene?
Yes.
With 1 minute? Because I really got inspired by Mriganka's proposition about love and care, and also he was also, I think, when he was unfolding his concept of the school, he was also, I think, mentioning alchemy, and I think. Of course, the Anglo-Saxon academia, as you are familiar with, makes big emphasis on kind of like secularized approaches, and also criticality that is often drained out of the poetics and drained out of the spiritual, right? And I think, if we are trying to now build the post institutions as also spaces of resilience and resistance, instead of continuing contributing to the dryness and the drying, and the draining, like thinking of the wetness, I think it is absolutely necessary, for us to, next to these ideas of love, care, spirituality, poetics, also, bring these phenomena, historically kind of like separated, from the rational world, into the circulation. I'm not saying like into the center, because here we are dealing with pluralities, but I think they're becoming part of the circulation. Thank you.
Thanks. That's very useful. No, I'll just open up the discussion now to the audience for any kinds of comments or questions that they might have. So yeah, anybody. You can either raise your hand or type in your question.
Thanks, guys. It was really very nice. I mean, it was this is Prasad, by the way, Prasad Shetty. So it's very nice. It's very provocative, yes, but also extremely considered and generous in terms of the attitudes, actually. So it's very nice, and I believe that those softer ways of thinking through ideas of experience, of love, of meaning, uh, uh, those, and how does one kind of think through those alternative logics of to enter the environment question, to enter uh, instead of the classical question. I think that was amazing, the way you all kind of opened up the whole thing, and we've got some clues in terms of approaching and rethinking pedagogy around the environment question. Definitely, I have no question as such, but for us, I think Rohit and Sabha, I think how do you kind of activate uh, these softer dimensions that both Gediminas and Reganga are are kind of mobilizing for us, and even Rohit's work, actually, and like what you said now, what would be the methodologies, what would be the institutional forms, what and to take clues, I think, you know, the direct interaction with environmental material, actually, like Mrigaga's burning of the of the house finally, or the detailed kind of dealing with the swamp, walking through it, and kind of I think this direct engagements, I think that is an important clue, direct engagements with uh, the environmental conditions, because I think that will open up the whole experiential dimension in a visceral way. I think that visceral understanding of the environment now, I think that is, I think, is an important clue for us pedagogically to kind of go ahead. Yeah, I think that's the thing, the direct visceral way of.
I mean, I completely agree. And both Gediminas's as well as Migang's proposition of deploying different kinds of methodologies of engaging uh, with the habitat, whether, I mean, engaging all kinds of senses, whether it is through hearing, listening, sound, uh, and then in Devarsha's work, through smell and other kinds of ways becomes a useful way of thinking through. I want to kind of do. I also want to propose that on the one hand, an engagement with experiences poses the eidetic world, an imaginative world that one needs to kind of open out. I also feel one needs to advance phronetic inquiries because, as Mrigang pointed out, that we have a habit, there is a habit of repetitive breakdown, collapse, and the whole aspect of forgetting. And what he uses the term memory to kind of, he uses memory, that the idea of remembering something that may possibly have been done in different ways. Also, phonetic inquiries. It's like the imagination of eidetic words may itself not allow us to change things because one needs to also explore the ways in which power works in these contexts. And therefore, who does what with whom? How do things work in terms of relationship? Are concurrent inquiries that need to be operated in that sense. So on the one hand, inquiries into eidetic worlds uh, through through the sensorium, through experience, but also phronetic inquiries into thinking about power. They will hit against one another and transform one another. There'll be a friction.
That is also the reason actually I quite enjoy, I would say in my own education, I was actually, to be very frank, I studied cinema and new media, but I was quite influenced by a lot of architects because I quite enjoyed reading the proposal, unrealized proposals, because somewhere, as you say, this is also very visceral, and that which is somewhere, the lack. I didn't care about a lack of materiality, but that proposals were also the actually means that possible worlds, which is actually, I saw it more or less like this kind of storyboards or script of possible. So this is quite interesting, which I think I just wanted to point out that in this work of space or architects, space designers. So that's where I derive a lot of my I.
Thanks. Are there any other comments or questions?
I think I have to come and conclude this as well. But I think what is interesting in this, this idea of the visceral engagement, questions of power also kind of get more complex, right? Like in that sense, it's interesting that it doesn't allow you to create binaries, but kind of, allows the swampiness of kind of looking at power in much more interesting ways. I think that's kind of it's because otherwise, in some ways, the binaries also kind of get limiting, right? So I think that visceral engagement, which we are seeing in all three of your presentations, opens up power in much more complex ways, which I think is quite interesting.
Thanks. Um, so, um, I mean, I think we passed 9, which
Yeah.
is where we were supposed to stop. So I'd like to thank Mrigank and Jediminas for lovely, lovely conversation. Um, it really kind of, for us, seeing work emerging in uh, these different contexts has been very important for some of the commonalities that, the synergies that kind of we wanted to note down, but also learn from you all in terms of pushing the boundaries of our work further. So thank you for this lovely conversation. And we hope to be in touch with you in conversation with you more often. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
With that,
Thank you.
I will invite Rupali to make the final concluding comments of the overall day, which is a tough job. So that's yours, Rupali.
Oh my God, this has been a very, very interesting and very engaging day. And I mean, I think it's a tall order to do this, to conclude these 4 very, very diverse and very, sort of complex and thick sort of panels. But I think what they have done in many ways is that they have uh, done what we were looking for, in many ways. They have given us several coordinates to think through. And just to, if I can, there are two vectors through which we were thinking of this conference. One was the idea of the post-institution, right, which is in some ways a way for us to think of rupturing the modern institution that to us is inadequate to grasp the contemporary, right? So in some ways, we are looking at the post institution as a way of actually creating new organizational structures that are able to engage with the complexities of the contemporary. And I think that's something that we are seeing across the panels. Even when we're located within the institution, many of us we're seeing that there are experiments that push the boundaries of those of the institutions itself. So I'm going to come to that in each of these. But the second vector that we were very much interested in is to kind of start interrogating the current frameworks of pedagogy. Okay, and the way we're doing that in the school is through these four verticals, research verticals that we've been engaged with, but which also sort of resonates with a lot of the work of our friends who have joined the panel discussion with us. That being the idea of emerging housing, the idea of mobilizing visual culture to think of life and living, the idea of employing digital pedagogy as a kind of way of rethinking for us the possibilities of engagement. I'll detail that, or I'll come to that. And the fourth is, in this last panel, in some ways refracting the idea of environment, which has otherwise been seen, in a very narrow way as an object that has to be saved. But there are many more vectors to think of the environment through, which is what this panel has opened up. So if I can just move to the first panel, the housing panel, I think one of the things that it has done for us is that what it has sort of asked us to do is to build an archive of the contemporary. The fact that many of our ways of thinking of housing in pedagogy come from older structures of modern ways of thinking of housing. However, emerging practices, emerging urbanization has shown us that these are inadequate. So in some ways, what was articulated was to build this archive of the contemporary to validate these new positions. Yeah. And the second, I think, interesting thing was a question to practice, and that practice in some ways is limited in the way it organizes itself, right? And there's a kind of skewed ethics that comes from this idea of professional practice, and you in some ways work towards that professional ethics, which again is inadequate and in some ways limits the understanding of what is possible through the practice of housing. And so in that sense, there was a kind of provocation to look at practice as a series of verbs, new verbs to generate ways of engagement, and possibilities of entering this idea of the contemporary through. But also, I think that the third thing that the housing panel kind of spoke about is the idea of asking new philosophical questions to this idea of housing, new conceptualizations, which again open up for us this idea of housing beyond the object of the house. And I think I mean, I also kind of, we ended up with also saying that the questions of form and experience, vis-a-vis relationships, are extremely important. That would in some ways challenge our techno-legal idea, statistical thinking that has limited our kind of understanding of housing, that come from a strong sort of arguments for shortage, that are framed around questions of shortage, questions of affordability, tenure security, and other things, where a more phenomenological kind of idea of thinking of form and experience and relationships of space can sort of, in some ways, deflect those kind of narrow questions. So I think, I mean, there's a lot that we have over here in housing to bring into our pedagogy and pedagogical practices. I'll move on to the second panel. The second panel on visual culture, and what is, in some ways, it's also one of the youngest verticals at sea. But I think extremely important, because in some ways it's something that moves across all the it moves across all the inquiries. So I think it's one of the most important verticals that in some ways we have engaged in. And some of the things again that emerged here was drawing as a verb as opposed to drawing as a method, or a tool. So how do you kind of think of drawing as a verb, but also shifting notions of visual culture from the ideas of static representation that it has been understood as, to more relational ideas. I think that was an important shift, that's something that we can draw on. And also this idea of a critical spatial practice, that one needs to train students to kind of see critically, right? So there's a kind of idea of visual culture that allows you to see critically. But I think also what also tied up all of them was the idea of a phenomenological, visceral engagement in visual culture, to think of everything around you as visual culture. So it's not a drawing, is not an object or something outside it, but it's a culture that you're immersing in. And when you do that, I think it allows you to I think also it kind of connects to the previous panel, that in some ways, if you do that, if you immerse yourself phenomenologically in kind of ideas of life and living, then it challenges many structures through which we have seen space so far: cartographic structures, compartmentalized ways of doing things, statistical ways of seeing things. I think all of those are able to kind of open up and deflect, because you're now kind of locating yourself into the politics of visual culture. So I think that is very important as a takeaway. And the third panel was the digital. And I think what was really interesting in the digital panel was the four very, very diverse vectors through which we entered. And it also came from four diverse selves. And I think Kush articulated it quite interestingly, the idea of the biography of the instructor. And I think that's something that is useful And again, something that we have been articulating in the school to shift the idea of pedagogy from the idea of a curriculum that is imparted, this kind of object which is outside that is imparted, to a series of practices of people who are asking questions, and students who are, as much practitioners as anything else. And so the biography of the instructor is an important tool to bring to our pedagogical processes. But within that, we saw the idea of the hacking of the institution, right? Again, the institution not as this big white elephant, but in some ways you hack it. You create flatter organizations. You don't have a top-down structure of a principal, a dean, and series of people under it. But in some ways, there is a kind of flatter organization that is built, that is that is able to be more nimble in many ways, and create new forms of organizational thinking. So I think that was the idea of hacking the institution was interesting. And then the idea of engaging in digital humanities that bring in diverse subjectivities to reshape knowledge, right? That in some ways there is often you see that there is a kind of dominant colonial sort of hangover of knowledge structures. And so how do you deflect that by bringing in diverse subjectivities? And so I think that was an interesting addition. But also this idea of the hack as a process and a method, that we saw. And the idea that how do you kind of reshape this to think of multiple locational conditions, right? Whether you're in a pandemic situation, or you are located in a kind of environment which, where you do not have multiple resources, how do you create this hack of a methodology that is able to engage with diverse localities? And then the fourth one, which was again very interesting, the idea of cooking as a metaphor for building. And in some ways, what that does, and through this kind of talking about challenging the idea of scale, the scale which comes from big data, big organizations, that deflects the idea of a kind of organizational structure, but and also an aesthetic that comes from the softness of cooking, right? And in some ways, it opens up many metaphors for us, questions of gender, questions of a kind of, again, an organizational structure that comes from lesser resources, from other ways of doing things. So I think that was quite a beautiful metaphor. But we also kind of ended up with this idea of digital sensoriums. What does it mean to kind of engage in digital sensoriums? I don't think we kind of have an answer to that, but I think that's a very interesting provocation to take back and think through, maybe for the next panel, the next time we meet. And I think, again, just to kind of end with the fourth panel, which was again very interesting in these two vectors. One is new epistemological thinking of the idea of environment. And the second interesting framework was also the infrastructure of pedagogy. How do you kind of rethink the infrastructure of pedagogy? And so our kind of the shifting or the irritant to kind of our epistemological thinking right now comes from the metaphors, which was proposed, came from ideas of thinking of swarms, of rivers, of temporal ways of inhabiting, from ideas of care, which in some ways are something that are not there currently in many of our epistemes of thinking of the environment. So I think these were very interesting vectors that came in. Also the idea of the amphibian pedagogy, the questions of non-Western, decolonial kind of epistemes that came in. But I think I'll end with what I was very interested in was the infrastructure of pedagogy. But whether it was the idea of friendship as infrastructure, or the idea of sort of viscerally kind of walking in and engaging in the swamp, or this idea of careful listening of stories from the ground, or ideas of care that required a completely different vantage point and a very different kind of infrastructure of pedagogy. So I think I'll end there. I think these have been very, very interesting coordinates that it would be lovely to start seeing coming into our course structures. And I mean, I think they are there in many ways, and in all the ways in which we've been thinking. But I think it'll be nice to come back maybe for a next panel after this, in this to use Mrigang's term, this infrastructure of friendship that has already been created around us, this assembly, and really sort of look at how we've taken these ahead in our pedagogical experiments. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. I mean, I think Mrigang and Gediman has continued, Bowling and Kush are here, Gautam and Vishwanath are not here. It's too late for them. And Niyal and Yara and Sanchayan. Sanchayan was here, no? Sanchayan was here for I mean, he put a question in the last panel also.
He was there till 6:30.
Okay, he was there till 6:30. So thank you everybody, all the participant, and thank you all the C faculty as well to kind of hold it together and have this compact kind of very energized kind of series of conversations. What I hope to do is very quickly kind of get something written from here, and then we'll distribute it, and we will kind of go from there, because I think the agenda that we set for ourselves to kind of look at it as a symposium workshop format for us to kind of really re-steer the pedagogic agendas as well as the institutional frameworks. This is a part of one of those things that we are doing, but we are doing many other things to do to kind of get some relevance into architectural education actually. So in that, the re-steering of content, of methods, of coordinates, of institutions, of many things are going on actually. So thank you guys. Thanks for participating and talking to us with so much generosity, and friendships are always very special. And for C is built on friendships really. C is for C, friendships is very, very special. So thanks, thank you very much, and we will find ways to kind of continue this companionship, and I think it's an important thing that we keep on calling people again and again. I mean, whoever we love, we keep on calling them again, and Kush knows that very well. So we kind of keep on calling. So we'll definitely find ways to kind of extend and figure out new ways to meet. So thank you very much, and thank you everybody who's listening. It has been a long day, afternoon and evening, and thank you all the organizers who helped in kind of really. It was a backbreaking thing to kind of organize this, the whole announcements and setting up and pre-meetings and all of those things. So it took a lot of time and effort. So thank you all everybody who got involved in this. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Good night. Until
Bye.
soon.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Can you all hear me?